Some men don't just kill for revenge. They kill for betrayal from the woman they once loved. These 3 American ruthless killers didn't murder their girlfriends or wives over petty fights or heated arguments. They killed for betrayal, for the cheating, the secrets, the lies whispered behind their backs. When love turned into humiliation, they turned silent, and then they made sure she'd never lie again. Before we begin, tell us, have you ever felt betrayal in love? Comment yes or no. And if you want to hear more disturbing serial killer cases like these, don't forget to subscribe. Because these stories weren't built on impulse, they were built on patience. Matthew Delaney lived in a small town outside Roanoke, Virginia. In a 2-story home he had rebuilt piece by piece after inheriting it from his grandfather. To most of the town, he was the quiet, capable type. Ran a home remodeling business, helped fix porches for retirees, donated leftover lumber to the high school shop class. He had been with Erica Talbot for nearly 5 years. She was a speech pathologist who worked out of a children's clinic an hour away. They met at a mutual friend's wedding and had been inseparable since, or at least that's what people thought. Matthew was methodical, not just in work, but in life. He believed in patterns, routine, predictable behavior. So when Erica began deviating, when she started leaving 10 minutes earlier than usual, when her calls became shorter, when her eyes didn't meet his during dinner, he noticed. He didn't say anything the first week, or the second. He watched, studied. He remembered what time she left, what time she came home, noted down the mileage on her car, recorded the weight of her overnight bag. Her excuses were standard: extended evaluations, a colleague's birthday, a surprise staff meeting. But the lipstick she wore started changing. She bought new undergarments. She began humming in the shower again. None of it matched the woman who, just a month prior, complained about being overworked and drained. The real crack came on a rainy Tuesday. Erica had left in a rush that morning, forgetting her lunch. Matthew, knowing her usual route, drove to surprise her with it. But he didn't find her car at the clinic. He didn't find it anywhere along her route. He eventually spotted it parked behind a budget inn off the bypass. It sat next to a silver sedan with Pennsylvania plates. He waited. 2 hours later, she emerged from room 14 wearing a different jacket than the one she left with. Her hair was damp. She kissed the man from the other car on the neck. Matthew didn't flinch. He didn't follow her back. He went home. That night, he made dinner, watched a movie with her, and offered a back massage like nothing had changed. Over the next week, he began reshaping the interior of his mind like he would a floor plan. He didn't want to kill her in the house. Too many connections, too much to sanitize. But the old family hunting cabin 30 miles out hadn't been used in years. No neighbors, no surveillance, no signal. He drove there on Thursday and spent 6 hours cleaning it out. He stocked it with snacks, a new mattress, firewood. He brought a roll of tarp, a package of cable ties, a bag of Ziplocs, industrial gloves, and a cordless reciprocating saw. He buried a waterproof bin 50 yards into the woods behind the cabin. Inside the bin, a change of clothes, bleach tablets, burner phone, sealed bag of cash, emergency keys to his uncle's storage shed 3 counties away. The plan was no longer just an idea. It was architecture. The next night, he told Erica he had a surprise planned. A weekend getaway, just the 2 of them. She seemed hesitant at first, asked if they could reschedule. He smiled, said everything was already booked and paid. She agreed. They drove up Saturday morning. She complimented the woods, the air, the view from the porch. Matthew handed her hot cider and said he was glad they were reconnecting. They played cards, listened to a Bluetooth speaker, and grilled steaks over a fire pit. He even offered to take her phone so they wouldn't be distracted. She laughed and gave it over willingly. That night, he lit candles in the cabin, poured wine, and suggested they go down to the small dock behind the property to watch the moon. Erica brought her jacket and a blanket. Matthew followed with a second thermos. Only one of them was spiked. He handed it to her. She sipped, complained it tasted odd. He apologized, saying he added too much cinnamon. She drank half. Within 10 minutes, she became sluggish, speech slower. He asked if she was okay. She said she felt dizzy. He walked her back to the cabin, helped her lie down on the bed. She mumbled something about not feeling right. He tucked her in, waited. When her eyes fluttered and stayed closed, he wrapped her wrists with the cable ties, did the same to her ankles, and laid a tarp beneath her. She stirred once. He placed a pillow over her face and pressed until the movement stopped. He didn't rush, didn't shake. The only sound was his breathing. When the stillness settled into Erica's chest and her limbs stopped reacting to the weight, Matthew didn't move immediately. He kept the pillow pressed for another 60 seconds, his eyes fixed on the twitching of her fingers until there wasn't any. He had read once that post-mortem reflexes could cause muscle spasms, so he waited, counted down from 100. When he was sure there was no pulse, no breath, he stood up and began the sequence he had rehearsed silently for the past 2 weeks. The gloves went on first, nitrile, tight-fitting. He closed all the curtains, turned off every light except the small camping lantern hanging from a beam above the bed. He rolled Erica's body gently onto the tarp, adjusted her limbs so they bent naturally. The cable ties around her ankles and wrists had left deep red impressions, but no skin break. That mattered. He didn't want blood. Blood was messy. DNA was unforgiving. He removed her jacket, folded it, and placed it into a black contractor bag. Then the shoes. Her socks were damp from the walk to the dock. He added those too. He searched her body for jewelry, found a bracelet, earrings, and a necklace, and placed them into a labeled Ziploc. One by one, he bagged her clothes. Then he paused. He didn't want to dismember her inside the cabin, too confined. He needed drainage. Instead, he wrapped her entire body in the tarp, sealed it with duct tape at both ends, and pulled it off the bed. It hit the wooden floor with a dull thud. He slid her to the back door and propped it open. Outside, the air was colder. No moon that night, only wind. He dragged the tarp-covered body across the deck and onto the path leading toward the shed where he had stashed the cooler. The cooler was commercial grade, 120-quart capacity, used by hunters for storing deer. He had cleaned it with bleach earlier. He opened the lid, laid the cooler flat, and adjusted Erica's position so she curled inside, knees bent, head tilted. It took 2 attempts. When she fit, he packed frozen ice bricks around her, then sealed the lid, dragged it to the pickup bed, secured it with bungee cords. The drive to the disposal site was 26 minutes. He'd clocked it twice before. It was a private property once owned by a timber company, now abandoned, with half-built concrete foundation pits and overgrown access roads. No camera, no patrol. He arrived at 2:14 a.m. He reversed the truck down the gravel until it faced the largest pit. Unloading the cooler took effort. He let it drop, then flipped the lid. The body inside remained stiff, pale. He lifted her out by the shoulders and laid her on a new tarp already spread across the dirt. Then he unpacked the saw, battery-powered, sharp, brand new. The first cut was across the joint at the hip. No bone, just soft tissue. He knew which ligaments to avoid for splatter. He wrapped each limb in its own plastic sheath and sealed it with tape. The torso went into a duffel. The limbs in separate construction buckets. The head, last, was double-wrapped and placed inside an oil drum already partially filled with quicklime. He poured more quicklime until the surface was white and foaming, then sealed the lid with screws. The duffel and buckets were thrown into the second pit, one with rebar still sticking from the edges, and covered with scavenged scrap metal and broken sheetrock. The pit was shallow but overgrown. He scattered leaves, poured a mixture of bleach and dirt over the area to mask trace fluids, and covered the rest with discarded insulation foam boards. He returned to the oil drum, now sealed, and rolled it into the deepest corner of the lot where an old well casing had collapsed. He shoved it in, let it sink into the soft mud. It made no sound. Back at the cabin, he cleaned with alcohol. Every surface she had touched, doorknobs, counters, the toilet seat, the bed frame. The mattress was removed and dragged into the woods, where he set it on fire. He let it burn completely, then doused the ashes with a water bucket. He cleaned his clothes, bagged them, and dropped them off in a fire barrel a few miles from the site where he burned construction waste weekly. Her phone, once powered off, was dismantled, SIM removed, battery crushed, fragments scattered across 2 county dumpsters. He took photos of her final belongings, shoes, purse contents, makeup bag, then tossed them down a ravine next to the Appalachian Service Trail. The photos were later deleted from the burner phone after being forwarded to an encrypted folder he'd created weeks prior. The final item, a blood-stained pillow from the suffocation, was buried 6 feet under an old stump and marked with an inverted can lid to track soil shift. Matthew made sure his tracks around the cabin were brushed over with pine branches. He used vinegar to spray around the fire pit to discourage animal disturbance. He waited until sunrise before driving home. On the way, he stopped at a 24-hour laundromat, changed into fresh jeans and a thermal, and wiped down the steering wheel. By the time he reached Roanoke, it was past 9 a.m. He texted Erica's parents from her backup phone saying they had decided to go camping off the grid for a few days. He used the same emoji style she had in previous texts. He posted a story from her account, a photo of a lake trail she had once saved on her phone, taken 2 years ago, now uploaded as if fresh. No filters, no tags. The story ran for 24 hours. No one noticed the timestamp mismatch. Back at home, he kept her room untouched for a week. Let her mail pile up, told her co-workers she'd caught the flu. He used her toothbrush to lightly wet the bathroom sink each morning. No one called the police. Not until her mother grew suspicious after 5 days without voice contact. But even then, the house looked normal. Matthew gave a calm statement, said Erica had been feeling restless, needed a break. He cried when they asked more questions. The neighbors confirmed they'd seen her leave with Matthew on Saturday morning, but none had seen her return. For 9 days, Matthew Delaney's silence held. No knocks on the door, no flashing blues, no search warrants. He continued working his landscaping route, showed up on time, paid in cash. No calls from Erica's phone past the scheduled message he'd sent to her parents. But it was never going to last forever. The first crack came from something he hadn't controlled, Erica's smartwatch. She'd stopped wearing it weeks before the trip, claiming it made her wrists sweat. Matthew didn't account for it because it hadn't been on her when she died. But what he didn't know was that she'd charged it overnight in her car, syncing it to cloud health data. When her steps flatlined at 11:24 p.m. that Saturday night, precisely when he had pressed the pillow down, it silently logged a full stop in movement. Her last location was logged through Wi-Fi ping at the cabin. Her mother, growing anxious, called Erica's workplace and asked if anyone had seen her online. When the co-worker mentioned she'd viewed Erica's Strava activity from earlier in the month, her mom logged into her daughter's fitness account and saw the spike, then nothing. She brought that log to police. That was enough to warrant a digital trace. Detectives pulled cell tower records, GPS data from her main phone and backup. The lake trail story was fake. The timestamp was embedded in metadata. It had been posted at 2:37 a.m. Sunday, not Saturday afternoon like the caption claimed. That single inconsistency got them watching Matthew. His calls to Erica's parents were vague but polite. No anger, no mistakes. But surveillance of his cabin revealed something darker. Newly burned patches of forest near the fire pit. heat-scorched earth, foam ash residue. A wildlife officer on patrol flagged it and sent it to the sheriff. That earned a search warrant. When they searched the cabin, they found almost nothing, but almost was enough. Under the stump he thought he'd hidden well, a cadaver dog caught trace scent. The soil was disturbed despite the can lid marker. They excavated and found the crushed pillow, hair fragments, and a few strands of synthetic fiber matching Erica's jacket lining. They raided his home the same evening. Matthew didn't run. He opened the door calmly, invited them in, said he was just about to head out. Inside, everything looked normal, too normal. The house was spotless. No toothbrushes in the bathroom except his. No hair in the drain but his own. Erica's favorite mug was clean and dry in the dish rack, unused for days. That sterile perfection only deepened suspicion. Forensics seized his laptop and found cached photos of Erica's belongings. GPS located to a ravine 18 miles away. When officers searched the area, they recovered her makeup bag, partially buried under pine debris, and one sneaker sole melted at the edge of a small trash fire pit. By day 3 of the investigation, Matthew's silence began to crack. He was brought in for questioning, and his calm demeanor didn't waver until they played the Strava data across the table and asked, "Why did her heart rate flatline at your cabin?" He blinked. His fingers tapped once, then stopped. He asked for water, but the pressure mounted. The commercial cooler in his truck, long since cleaned, still held residue from the melted ice bricks. Forensic techs swabbed it and matched faint blood protein markers to Erica's DNA. The kicker came when they examined the burner phone used to post from Erica's account. They found a half-deleted photo in the cache, the lake trail image, time-stamped 2:37 a.m. That was the timestamp that didn't match Erica's phone settings. It proved the post was staged. That was the nail. In court, Matthew pled not guilty. He never spoke about motive. His lawyers claimed circumstantial evidence, but the prosecutors had a chain: digital logs, blood traces, synthetic fibers, metadata. The jury deliberated only 4 hours. He was sentenced to life without parole. In prison, he never spoke Erica's name, never wrote a confession. But in one interview, when asked if he regretted anything, he simply said, "I should have destroyed the watch." But Matthew Delaney wasn't the only one who wore a mask of control. In a different state, a different life, another man played the role of perfect partner until betrayal rewired him into something colder. This one didn't use his hands. He used a slow, silent weapon, one that couldn't be heard until it was too late. Elias Hartford was a systems engineer in Colorado Springs who kept to routine: quiet mornings, a fixed breakfast, bills paid on the first, and his girlfriend Simone's favorite almond creamer always stocked before she could ask. They'd lived together for almost 6 years, a calm domestic life built around structure. It was during one of those mundane routines that Elias noticed it: a $117 charge from a luxury boutique in Denver on a day he was out of town. Simone never wore anything from that store. He didn't question her. Instead, he opened a second checking account. She never knew. Every financial breadcrumb led him deeper. The boutique was just the start. Wine charges at restaurants they'd never visited, hotel stays tagged under her maiden name, Uber trips to neighborhoods she didn't have friends in. He charted every inconsistency in a spreadsheet labeled Home Inventory. She never noticed him watching. He smiled the same, folded her laundry, still preheated her car in winter. But his mornings shifted. He stopped going to the gym. Instead, he began researching. Not guns, not knives. He wanted silence, slow fade, a process she wouldn't see until the end. Elias immersed himself in toxicology forums. He didn't want something that killed immediately. It had to mimic illness. He narrowed down to heavy metal salts. Thallium sulfate was his answer: tasteless, odorless, and lethal over weeks if dosed correctly. But it was restricted, hard to acquire. So he made his own. Using pesticides as a base, he isolated trace compounds and began a dilution process in his garage. Ventilation, gloves, no mistakes. Meanwhile, he played the long game. He began encouraging Simone to work from home more often, to relax, to take better care of herself. He cooked more. He started buying organic teas, pouring her glass bottles of filtered water. The first dose came in the form of a vitamin smoothie. It was only micrograms. She didn't notice a thing. Over the next 2 weeks, he increased the frequency, always in liquids, soups, juices, sometimes in the whipped cream of her coffee. Her first symptom was fatigue. She chalked it up to work stress. He nodded empathetically, bought her a silk eye mask, and started doing more around the house. Then came the hair loss. She panicked. Elias booked her a dermatologist. He let her cry into his chest at night while her comb filled with strands. As the 3rd week rolled in, she began stumbling slightly when walking. Her doctor suggested anemia. Elias made her liver-rich meals, even bought iron supplements, which she took, and into which he injected his diluted compound. The poisoning was slow enough to evade alarm, fast enough to escalate. Her fingertips began to feel numb. Her vision blurred intermittently. Elias told her it might be migraines. She wept. He held her. Meanwhile, he recorded every dose, symptom, and response in a journal labeled Wellness Log with a clean blue pen. On day 25, she vomited twice in a row after breakfast and passed out in the hallway. He called 911, sobbing into the phone, performing concern with award-winning precision. In the hospital, tests were inconclusive. Blood work showed anomalies, but no infection, no obvious toxin. She was sent home. He insisted she rest. That night, he gave her chamomile tea, laced with the final, heavier dose. By dawn, she couldn't feel her legs. Her nerves were shutting down. Elias acted fast, too fast. He drove her to a different ER, saying he didn't trust the last doctors. But her condition had already crossed the irreversible line. She coded during transfer. They revived her, but she fell into a coma by afternoon. Elias stayed at her bedside, unreadable. Doctors searched for causes, autoimmune, infection, stroke. But thallium wasn't a standard screening in US panels. Elias knew that. He cleaned the house while she lay unconscious, wiped all utensils, dumped every bottle of water, and replaced cookware. The smoothie blender was scrubbed inside out. He deleted his browser history and threw out the wellness log. Simone's family never suspected him. The doctors didn't either. But one ICU nurse noticed something strange. Simone's eyebrows were beginning to fall out, a rare but distinctive symptom of thallium exposure. She flagged toxicology. The test was delayed, but when results came in 96 hours later, it confirmed lethal thallium levels. The hospital called police, but by the time they showed up to question Elias, he was gone. His car was found abandoned 2 counties away, parked neatly behind a public library. Inside were his phone, wallet, and Simone's favorite scarf folded on the dashboard. He had vanished. No fingerprints were found in the garage. The homemade compounds were gone. The only remaining trace was in Simone's bloodstream, and a teacup, missed in the dishwasher with a faint metallic residue embedded in the porcelain glaze. The night before her collapse, Elias prepared everything like a final performance. The tea set was already on the kitchen counter, spotless and glistening under the warm bulb light, as if inviting calm. He'd measured the dose earlier that afternoon, precisely 20 milligrams of the final suspension. He diluted it into a small mason jar of local honey and stirred it into her chamomile tea with slow, silent care. Simone lay in bed with an eye mask over her head, weak and dizzy from the previous bouts of vomiting. When he brought her the tea, she sipped it with a faint smile, murmuring that he was her rock, that she didn't know what she'd do without him. Elias said nothing. He just watched her drink, eyes steady. Within 45 minutes, she was unconscious. He placed her mug into the dishwasher but didn't start the cycle. That was his only mistake. For the next 3 hours, he cleaned the apartment methodically. All the prepware used to process the compound, coffee filters, droppers, tiny glass vials, had already been burned 2 days earlier in the fire pit behind an abandoned campsite 30 miles away. The blender blade was soaked in lemon juice and vinegar, scrubbed with steel wool until the coating thinned. All trash bags had been double-lined, taped, and tossed during midnight drives in public dumpsters across 3 towns. His gloves were boiled and melted into hardened plastic sheets. He even wiped down the inside of the garbage disposal unit. By morning, the house smelled of lavender and bleach. Elias changed Simone's clothes into a fresh cotton set, brushed her hair, and called 911 with a timed panic in his voice. The EMTs arrived to find a clean apartment, a well-organized man, and an unresponsive woman with what appeared to be sudden nerve failure. He gave them a detailed account of symptoms: fatigue, headaches, numbness, digestive issues. It sounded rehearsed because it was. At the hospital, Simone slipped into a coma within hours. Blood work showed abnormalities, anemia, low potassium, unexplained inflammation, but no clear cause. Elias signed every form, held her hand, and watched her heartbeat on the monitors like he was studying code. He requested privacy often. He brought her favorite sweater from home and draped it over the hospital chair. Nurses noted how calm he was. One called him a saint, but none of them knew what to test for. Thallium isn't on most standard toxicology panels. It was a seasoned ICU nurse, mid-50s, who noticed something off while brushing Simone's hair. Entire strands were slipping out at the root with barely any resistance. Then she noticed Simone's eyebrows had faded, not thinned, but vanished. She looked it up that night and made the call. She wasn't sure, but she flagged the chart. Toxicology was ordered. It took 3 days. During that time, Elias kept his performance flawless. He read articles aloud at her bedside. He adjusted her pillows. He cried twice, once loud enough that others heard, once silently, with one hand over his face. Then, on the 4th night, he told staff he needed to step out for air. He never returned. His apartment was left untouched, nothing suspicious. Police arrived only after the toxicology report came in and flagged dangerous levels of thallium in Simone's blood. But by then, Elias's trail was cold. He had left his phone in the hospital bathroom, tucked behind the sink pipe. His car was later found parked at a train station with no ticket record. In the trunk was only a blanket and an unopened bag of protein powder. But back at his apartment, the dishwasher had never been run. A forensic team dusted the teacup. The glaze had faint traces of the compound, not enough to kill, but enough to prove intent. That, paired with hospital evidence, was enough for a warrant. But there were no fingerprints on the cup, not even Simone's. Elias had worn gloves even while handling her mug. Security footage from the train station was grainy. A figure, hooded and calm, entered the platform just after 1:12 a.m., stood near a vending machine for 12 minutes, then walked off screen. No confirmed sightings since. His bank accounts remained untouched. His face never appeared again. Simone remained in a coma for 42 more days, and when she woke, she had no memory of the month leading up to her collapse. She couldn't recall the smoothies, the tea, or the quiet change in Elias's behavior. The only trace of his existence was a single email sent weeks later from an anonymous account. It read, "You trusted me. That was the last mistake." In the weeks after Elias Hartford vanished, investigators moved fast, but they weren't chasing a man. They were chasing a shadow that had erased every trace of its own outline. Surveillance footage from the hospital parking lot showed no car leaving around the time Elias disappeared. The train station footage gave only a silhouette. Facial recognition software yielded nothing, and his fingerprints, once held from a minor trespassing charge years ago, had been scrubbed from national databases due to a clerical error. The only clue was the teacup found in the dishwasher and the thallium report from the hospital. But both pieces were circumstantial until detectives dug deeper into Elias's financial records and found that 6 months prior, he had purchased a rare book on 19th century poisons using a pseudonym tied to an old college email. The book had been shipped to a P.O. box 2 towns over, one that hadn't been accessed in months. Inside it, still sealed in plastic, was a small velvet pouch containing an antique silver spoon with traces of heavy metals. It was the first hard link to the poison. They cross-referenced the delivery dates with Simone's medical logs. Symptoms had started almost exactly 1 week after the delivery. That proved planning. But it didn't explain how someone like Elias, a school administrator with no criminal past and no connections to the dark web, had sourced thallium, which is strictly regulated in the US. A forensic sweep of his office computer revealed nothing. The browser had been wiped clean, history overwritten 35 times, and the internal hard drive removed and replaced with a new one weeks before Simone fell ill. Detectives started to believe Elias had tested the poisoning process before. They began looking at his past relationships, especially a woman named Nadine who had died of undetermined complications 2 years earlier while they were briefly dating. Her autopsy had never included a toxicology panel beyond standard narcotics. She had complained of similar symptoms, fatigue, nausea, hair loss, before collapsing at home. Her case was reopened, but her body had been cremated. There would be no conclusive proof, only pattern. Investigators interviewed Elias's co-workers, his neighbors, even Simone's friends. Everyone said the same thing. He was calm, soft-spoken, brilliant with logistics, and fiercely private. One neighbor recalled that Elias had covered all his windows with thick blackout curtains 6 months before Simone's collapse and had installed multiple layers of locks on the front and back doors, strange for their low-crime suburb. Another mentioned that Elias had stopped receiving any physical mail and only picked up packages from distant delivery lockers. That's when the FBI stepped in. A psychological profile was drawn. Elias was methodical, intelligent, and emotionally detached. They believed he had been preparing for years, not just months. He had constructed an exit strategy long before Simone ever betrayed him. He had likely memorized escape routes, forged documents, and possibly had multiple identities. They scoured international airports for matching builds and aliases. Nothing. No passport usage, no cash withdrawals, just complete, calculated disappearance. Meanwhile, Simone recovered slowly. She regained most of her motor function, but had severe memory loss. She remembered fragments, Elias bringing her tea, the apartment smelling like bleach, an odd metallic taste in her mouth, but nothing she could articulate as fact. She refused interviews and moved to another state under a protected identity. But she left behind one clue she didn't realize was important: a journal entry from a few days before her collapse. It was short. It read, "He's being so kind lately, like the old days. But I feel cold inside, like my bones are humming. I think it's just stress." That entry became a haunting summary of Elias's entire method: charm, calm, kill. The case remains open. He is still wanted for attempted murder and felony poisoning, with a federal warrant active across multiple countries. His photo is on a few most wanted lists, though many agencies admit they don't think he'll ever be caught. No activity has ever appeared under his social security number. Some speculate he never left the country, but changed identities and built a new life within the US. Others believe he's dead, possibly by suicide, knowing the walls were closing in. But every few months, a hospital somewhere receives a patient with nerve collapse and no clear cause. And every time, toxicology is now expanded, just in case. There are whispers among poison control boards, never confirmed publicly, that someone is out there testing variables, dosage, dilution, rate of decay. Whether it's Elias or a copycat, no one can say. But one fact haunts the case file to this day. Before Simone, Elias had visited 6 cities in 4 months, and in each one, a woman had died of rare, unexplained nerve degeneration. No charges were ever filed, no connections ever confirmed, just names, symptoms, and silence. The file on Elias Hartford is still marked active, high intelligence risk. One vanished without a trace, the next didn't even try, because not every killer hides. Some want the moment to be seen, even remembered, especially when the fall was the final lie she never saw coming. Tyler Grayson worked in outdoor gear retail and spent his weekends leading beginner hikes for tourists along the cliffs of Sedona, Arizona. He was fit, quiet, and had a near mythical knowledge of the terrain, the kind of man who could guide a group blindfolded and never lose the trail. He met Brooke Maddox on one of those hikes, a Los Angeles transplant who'd just moved to Flagstaff for grad school. She was curious, funny, and not remotely outdoorsy, which only made her fascination with Tyler more intense. Within months, they were inseparable. Friends described it as the classic opposites attract story. He was the grounded guide, she was the whirlwind artist. But beneath Tyler's calm demeanor was a control problem he never showed anyone. He needed to be respected, obeyed, trusted, and when he found out Brooke had been texting her ex, not sleeping with, not even seeing, just texting, it didn't explode him, it hollowed him. He didn't confront her. Instead, he smiled. He planned. For 2 weeks, he turned warmer, more attentive. He told Brooke he wanted to take her somewhere special, a sunrise hike up a closed ridge called Bell's Edge, which had been blocked off due to erosion and loose shale. But Tyler knew the path. He'd led solo hikes there during off hours. He told her they'd take coffee, pastries, sit near the overlook, and watch the desert light shift gold over the red cliffs. She agreed, thrilled by the intimacy. That morning, he picked her up at 4:30 a.m. sharp. She was sleepy, bundled in a hoodie and trail pants, sipping coffee he handed her. Decaf, though she didn't know it. He didn't want her alert. The hike was steep, winding and silent except for the scuff of their boots and the chirping of morning birds. Tyler kept glancing at the sky, pretending to check cloud cover. But he wasn't watching the weather. He was watching time. He needed the light to be just right, not too bright, not too dark. When they reached the overlook, the wind was low and the view was flawless. Brooke stood at the edge, arms outstretched, soaking it in. She didn't see him circle behind her. He mentioned a rock formation, gestured for her to look left, and as she turned, he stepped forward, quick, firm, silent, and placed one hand on the middle of her back. Not a shove, just pressure. It was enough. Her foot caught loose gravel, her body tilted. There was no scream, just the scrape of rubber soles, then nothing. She vanished below the rim. Tyler didn't look over. He sat on a rock, drank from his thermos, and waited 8 minutes, just enough for realism. Then he called 911 with shaking breath and said she'd slipped trying to take a photo. Search and rescue arrived by 6:15. The drop was fatal. Her body was wedged between sharp outcrops, 60 feet down. The paramedics declared her dead at the scene. Tyler wept, told the Rangers it was his fault, said he should have told her to stay back. The story fit. There were no cameras, no witnesses, just a grieving boyfriend with red eyes and a perfect alibi. Tyler returned from the hike an hour after Brooke had been declared dead. Her body had been recovered by Rangers and medics who rappelled down the rock face, confirming what Tyler had claimed, a fatal fall onto a jagged cliff shelf. But while others mourned, Tyler cleaned. He returned Brooke's favorite hoodie to her apartment and made sure her phone was back on her nightstand with the screen facing down. The message threads with her ex had already been deleted weeks ago. He even sent a sympathy email to her mother with links to grief counseling, timed precisely 2 hours after the official report of her death was filed. The entire town saw him as the shattered boyfriend who lost the love of his life to a tragic accident. For 2 weeks, he managed the narrative. He cried in interviews, attended candlelight vigils, and even led a commemorative hike to the same overlook. But not everyone believed it. Park Ranger Leland Morris had been working Sedona trails for over 2 decades. He knew Bell's Edge well, and something bothered him. The ridge had been blocked off for months due to its instability, yet Tyler had led her there anyway. Morris reviewed past permits and noticed Tyler had accessed the ridge 3 times in the past 6 months, always alone and always before sunrise. When he pulled up drone footage taken by a wildlife research program on the morning of the incident, one frame caught Morris's eye. A figure standing slightly behind Brooke, arm raised, not in a wave, but poised. It was blurry, not enough to prove anything, but enough to doubt everything. Morris didn't accuse Tyler directly. Instead, he called in a forensic team from Phoenix to re-examine the site. That's when they found the boot print. One partial heel mark, facing inward, near the edge, as if someone had stepped forward, not slipped back. The tread was consistent with Tyler's hiking boots, but it wasn't enough to charge him. The techs also discovered a patch of loose shale that had been recently disturbed, but not in the way an accidental slide would have caused. It looked cleared, almost swept. And then came the digital clue. While going through Tyler's phone backup, they found metadata from a deleted app, a GPS path mapping tool for off-grid navigation. The app had been used to mark the precise coordinates of Bell's Edge overlook 4 weeks before the hike. The coordinates had been flagged with a title, Drop Point. Tyler claimed it was an inside joke about cell signal loss. But when the Phoenix investigators cross-checked the timestamp, it aligned with one of Tyler's early morning solo trips. Pressure built slowly. Tyler, once calm and collected, began missing work. He canceled the second memorial hike. Then he tried to delete all his social media accounts. But by then, police had quietly obtained a warrant and were watching his movements. One afternoon, they watched him drive out of town alone, heading north. By the time state troopers stopped him near Page, Arizona, he had camping gear, $2,000 in cash, and Brooke's necklace in the glove compartment. Tyler said he kept it for memory, but the chain was broken and the clasp had blood residue. Tyler's calm began to unravel the moment he realized the park rangers weren't just offering condolences, they were cross-referencing timelines. After Brooke's accidental fall, he returned to normal life with clinical precision, organizing a candlelight vigil, speaking softly to the press about the dangers of mental health in the wilderness, even creating a memorial scholarship fund in her name. But behind the scenes, small pieces didn't fit. Ranger Garrett Barnes had been reviewing trail permits for a completely unrelated wildlife tagging survey when he noticed Tyler's name repeatedly. Solo visits, always to the same remote area of the San Francisco peaks, with precise timestamps over several weeks leading up to the fatal hike. Each permit logged his entry and exit, and the system had recently upgraded to GPS trailhead check-ins. Barnes flagged it. At the same time, digital forensics had begun quietly working on Brooke's recovered phone and Tyler's laptop. Though he thought he'd deleted the apps used to pre-mark terrain elevation and footpath ridges, he hadn't wiped the cache, and inside were marked pins labeled pivot point, ledge mark, and the most damning, drop. Investigators recreated the topographical maps and overlaid them onto Tyler's known paths. It showed chilling forethought. He had walked those trails multiple times, measuring terrain, selecting where the soil was loose enough for a clean slip, and where rescue access would be delayed. Even more telling was the purchase history. 6 weeks before Brooke's death, Tyler bought a replacement GoPro chest mount and climbing gloves, neither of which he used during the couple's hike. When detectives quietly confronted him with a search warrant, they found both items still sealed in his garage, but the time-stamped receipt showed a clear timeline. More than anything, what truly tipped the scales was the boot print. One partial print found a few feet away from the cliff's edge, almost missed due to rain the following day. It was backward. The pattern suggested someone was walking away from the edge, not toward it, and the tread matched Tyler's hiking boots, which were stored meticulously in his garage, still caked with red Arizona dirt. Experts demonstrated in court that the stride length and heel depth showed a person walking steadily backward, like someone moving after placing a heavy object near the edge. It wasn't definitive on its own, but it was damning when placed alongside the scratched trekking pole Brooke had clutched, the one with skin cells under the grip not matching her own, and with lateral damage that aligned with being yanked during a struggle. Prosecutors built a timeline from metadata alone. Brooke's Fitbit, still worn during the hike, logged a spike in heart rate 2 minutes before her fall and a sudden flatline, which was typical in high-impact trauma. Tyler's phone, which he claimed he left on airplane mode, had briefly connected to a cell tower just 30 minutes before the incident. That ping led authorities to subpoena GPS logs from the car rental company they hadn't initially flagged, and that data showed Tyler stopped at a supply store an hour before the hike. Surveillance footage showed him buying rope and a tarp, neither of which were found on the trail but later recovered from a remote wooded drop site a mile downhill, rolled in duct tape and buried under stones. A cadaver dog confirmed the scent of decomposition on the tarp. That same tarp had fibers that matched those found in the hem of Brooke's hiking jacket, and investigators theorized he had wrapped her body temporarily before staging the fall site. In interrogation, Tyler refused to speak. He didn't flinch when presented with the photos. He didn't react when the detective showed him Brooke's final unsent text from the cabin the night before the hike, where she typed but never sent. "He's acting strange. If I go quiet, look at Tyler." That draft was left open on her notes app, time-stamped at 10:38 p.m. In court, Tyler maintained his silence throughout the trial. His defense attempted to argue that the hike was spontaneous, that Brooke had been emotionally unstable, and that the evidence was circumstantial. Fabric fibers, dirt samples, GPS data, all explainable in outdoor environments. But the jury wasn't swayed. What convicted Tyler wasn't just the science, it was the story. Piece by piece, prosecutors laid out a murder premeditated not with rage, but with calculation. He didn't just take her to the ridge and push her. He studied it, practiced it, purchased tools and left them behind, tested the soil, measured the angle. When it finally happened, it wasn't a burst of emotion. It was a quiet, intentional maneuver. He likely walked behind her, waited for her to sit. They found evidence she had removed her backpack, and then used his gloves to grip the straps of her bag and her shoulders, tilting her body with force and sudden momentum. The only sound she made was a half scream, partially muffled by the wind. She never stood a chance, and he had timed it for just before dusk, when shadows made drone searches less useful. Even her shoes were found facing uphill, not downhill, the final inconsistency that prosecutors pointed out in their closing remarks. When Tyler Grayson was sentenced to 38 years in state prison, he finally spoke. Just one sentence. If she hadn't lied, she'd still be here. Cold, final, and without remorse. The judge didn't respond. Neither did Brooke's family, who had heard enough. Tyler's tools, the rope, the gloves, the trail logs, all went into evidence boxes that now sit in a temperature-controlled facility labeled simply Grayson T. But to this day, one thing remains unproven: the GoPro chest mount. It had never been opened. But prosecutors believed he brought a different one, possibly recording the entire thing for review. That footage, if it existed, was never recovered. And that final silence of what else he planned, what else he might have done, remains buried somewhere in the mountains, along with the last breath of the woman who trusted him the most. Some men don't snap. They calculate. They stand beside the woman they once adored and wait for the moment she lets her guard down. These three killers didn't strike in passion. They struck in silence. No raised voices, no second chances. Just a lie, a plan, and the last breath of someone who thought love meant safety. And when it was over, they didn't run. They cleaned up, smiled, and watched the world grieve a death they designed.